Okay, apparently everything is working, so thank you guys very much for attending. This is a work group in a probably not so literal sense, as we're basically going to be reviewing the bills that we've worked out with the Senate as amended. So for everyone listening, everyone paying attention, this will be just a moment to present the bills. Obviously, we have been here from the PSC for any questions. We will be voting on this bill on Friday. So if there are any amendments from my colleagues, we need them by, obviously, before Friday so we can discuss them. And we'll move this into that voting posture on Friday. So if you'd like to get started with House Bill 1035.
So 1035, as it was entered, established a procurement process for a minimum of approximately 3.1 gigawatts of dispatchable energy generation and a related temporary expedited approval process. It established a ratepayer-funded incentive for nuclear energy, and it generally prohibited behind-the-meter co-location unless an equivalent amount of additional power was created by a generating station. So the first amendment to this bill is Amendment HB 1035 233226. This amendment introduces a bunch of ratepayer protections to the bill. The first ratepayer protection on page, the first ratepayer protection on page 3 of the bill is section 4-206.1 on page 3 of the amendment. I apologize. This creates for base rate proceedings, it creates a need to demonstrate reasonableness of the decision to use contractual labor versus in-house labor.
So real quick, what are you operating on?
The amendment.
I'm sorry?
The reprint?
No, so the reprint is for,
Oh, it says amendments, it'll say amendments to House Bill 1035 on the top, right?
yes.
The first packet.
Yeah, the first packet, 233226.
Yep, I got it.
These are not, are there page numbers?
3 and 4. 3 and 4 of the amendment.
Got you. Go ahead.
So the First Amendment requires that each public service company demonstrate to the commission the reasonableness of the use of internal labor in comparison to contractual labor. And they need to justify the use of contractual labor instead of the use of internal labor. The next amendment is related to STRIDE. It requires that they provide certain justifications in order to be approved for a STRIDE plan. The next amendment is related.
Joey, what page you on now?
I am on page 11 now. I'll say the page number, I apologize. So this was the STRIDE plan that was discussed in committee earlier this session. There was certain things removed. So when the STRIDE bill was introduced, it required a notification of electrification that was removed. It made mention of state climate policy that was removed. And the notification requirement was changed from 2 years to 6 months.
So you was on H.
What's 2 years to 6 months for what?
The notification.
All right. We took, I think, are we talking about these now? You want to just get through?
We can, no,
Yeah, so we took, I think, and this is
concern, almost every one of his suggestions, if not more, that came through. So the changes from the original bill, which was Delegate Embry's, it is now incorporated into this with the suggested changes from Delegate Pippi. I'm not saying he likes everything, but we did take all of his suggested changes. From the electrification is out, the state climate goals are out. There is an alternative pipeline language that I believe was removed. So that is kind of where we negotiated with the Senate on that. in case you guys have like the big chunks that you're trying to track.
We're on page 13 now of the amendment. It should say section 4-212. This next amendment requires that each electric company in the state establish a rate schedule for large load customers that are over 100 megawatts or at least 100 megawatts and has or is projected to have a load factor of over 80%. They will have to submit this rate schedule to the commission by July 1, 2026. No, it starts on page 4 and goes to page 13.
I think you're here to ask whenever.
Yeah, ask whatever question.
Yeah.
So jump in on the particular topic.
What was the point of the internal versus external labor? What are you trying to get at there?
There's a huge cost differential, apologize. You know what, Vice Chair, please.
Yeah, so if you look at a lot of the, I'll just use BG specific rate proceedings, that when they use contractor labor, it is significantly more than their in-house labor. And so that is more of a cost burden to the ratepayer. And all we're simply saying is you can use outside labor, but you need to justify that you don't have those tools in-house, and it has to be reasonable before you go external and hit the ratepayer more. From your perspective, Chris, kind of talking this through, right? It's like, obviously, internally, they have a labor union. I understand that portion of it. I'm not even thinking about it from that perspective. I am just strictly saying, dollars and cents, it is cheaper to do it in-house than it is to pull out-of-state contractors, sometimes not even from Maryland in.
Is there any criteria for justification? How they justify?
I believe it's just a reasonableness test, and it's left up to the PSC, Ben?
Yeah, so under C, we list what they need, the minimum of what they need to provide us when we get into a case over this, which is we want to see a comparison of the internal versus the contractual labor cost. Then they need to basically do a reasonable, they have to basically show the reasonableness of their management decision to do what they did.
Okay, and you're the judge of that, PSC?
Yes, the commission will be the judge of that.
Okay. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Playing. Oh. You, Delegate Adams, but it shows that a series of pole replacements, like one for one, when they were done with in-house labor, was something like 7,000 or 8,000 per pole, and with the contracted labor was something like 16,000 per pole. It's a very sort of narrow example, but that example I think is stark in showing where you see a difference, and there's not really a good justification for that. And so I think the idea is when you continue to see those kinds of numbers, and if you look at a lot of the reconciliations and the filings that are done asking for more money, often it's the contractual costs have gone up. If you look at the Exelon transmission line that's gone from $790 million to $1.5 billion, and you look at the differences, a lot of it is contractual labor costs that have gone up in addition to some materials. And so it just begs the question of, like, if it's the contractual stuff that's always causing the rate increases and you see this difference, you know, like we shouldn't restrict them from using contractual labor, and sometimes you need it for specialization, but especially when you're looking at pole replacement where it's exactly the same thing, I think that's really where, like, to protect ratepayers, I strongly support this approach. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So again, on page 13, this is the large load rate schedule requirement. It requires each electric company in the state to submit a rate schedule by July of 2026, a rate schedule for large load customers, and it will require PSC to consider certain factors in improving this schedule, like requirements that the large load customer cover the costs associated with any electric system build out required to interconnect the large load customer to the electric system. It makes PSC require whether the rate schedule protects electric system reliability, including through the use of low ramp periods, minimum billing demand, long-term contractual commitments and exit fees, guarantee or collateral requirements, penalties and reimbursement requirements, and whether it sufficiently ensures that the allocation of costs to large load customers under the schedule does not result in customers that are not large load customers unreasonably subsidizing the costs of large load customers under the schedule. Are there any questions on that?
Is there still a requirement that they have to replace the electricity that's being
If, that's only if they wanted to co-locate in a behind-the-meter arrangement. So the rate schedule is for large load customers that wanted to connect to the system in front of the meter, just like a residential customer or other commercial customers. Yes, the behind-the-meter requirements is still in. On
Dwayne.
page 18, oh, did you have a, go ahead.
I'm just skimming through. So I'm not, talking about the rate schedule, if you already have a rate agreement, what does it do after your agreement's up? Does it revert back to this new agreement?
So on page
15.
Yeah, 15. It does not, so this new rate schedule does not exist, does not apply to existing large load customers that already signed a service agreement before the effective date of the new schedule, as long as they don't expand their load by more than 25 megawatts, or they don't sign a new agreement that expands by more than 25 megawatts. So they can sign a new agreement as long as their capacity doesn't go above 25 megawatts from what they were already existing at.
Okay. Why the 25? What's that do if it does? What does that do?
Then they would have to go under this new rate schedule.
Okay, but they can stay on the old rate as long as it's under 25.
Yeah, so if you had a customer that had 100 megawatts and they wanted to move up to 115 megawatts, they would still be able to stay under their old schedule, but if they wanted to move to 125, then they would have to go under this new schedule.
Okay.
It gives some flexibility so that, if you grow a little, it doesn't impact you too much.
Until that schedule comes due. That rate, till the next rate change.
So as long as you don't expand by more than 25 megawatts, you don't have to go on this new rate schedule at all, if you're already an existing customer.
All right.
On page 18, this is dealing with multi-year rate plans 4-213. It states that the commission may only approve the use of a multi-year rate plan for distribution base rates only if the plan demonstrates a definite cost savings to consumers and the rate plan does not allow for the public service company to file for reconciliation of costs or revenue variances of the approved revenue component used by the commission to establish just and reasonable rates. And it also states that a public service company that files or has filed an application for a multi-year rate plan may not subsequently file for reconciliation of costs unless that filing for reconciliation was made on or before January 1st, 2025. Are there any questions?
Nope. But, sir,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the place I just want to make sure, and maybe you'll tell us later about amendments. I want to make sure that it's really clear that other parties or the Public Service Commission has the ability to get a reconciliation that might bring rates down. Like we're trying to prevent rates from going up in a filing from the utility. But I think that there may be times that the costs are lower than expected and we don't want to lose that ability. So I just want to make sure that make sure that's explicit in the bill going forward. So I can work with you on that. I just wanted to put that on the record. Is that? Well, so right now, the way it works in a multi-year plan, the plan's approved, and then you can have a true-up that either brings the rates down or brings them higher. And this explicitly makes it so they can't go higher. And I just want to make sure that we're explicit in here that PSC or OPC or others can have a true up that brings the rates down if there's reason to believe that the costs are lower. And I think this implies that, but I just want to make sure that we're explicit. So I can work with Dwayne on amendments or whoever.
All right.
Thank you.
On page 19, 4-214, this is for base rate proceedings for investor-owned gas companies. It requires that for them to recover reasonable and prudent costs, they must demonstrate that the customer benefits of the investment. They must demonstrate that the investor-owned gas company analyzed cost-effective options available to defer, reduce, or eliminate the need to replace, upgrade, or construct new components, including analysis of non-pipeline alternatives and leak detection. And they have to demonstrate the estimated risk reduction associated with a safety-related investment. Are there any questions on that section?
Go ahead, Ed.
So I'm catching on now. This is the Stride bill, and now we're throwing in some language that I'm familiar with. Have we amended that, or have we taken any industry thoughts on that part of it? Because what I remember from the bill hearing is there were some concerns about how that language might always lead to a negative outcome from do we replace it, or do we put in, electric lines instead, or use electrification? So I'm sorry, I'm trying to follow here, but the question is, does this amendment just bring the bill in the way we saw it in the hearing without any?
So it's two different amendments. So the amendment specifically for Stride, there was concern about electrification requirements. So non-pipeline alternatives were taken out of Stride. The notification requirement was reduced to 6 months, and no mention of electrification was in it. And any mention of climate was removed from the bill as well. This is related to base rate gas proceedings. So if you remember with Stride, that is a surcharge to, accelerate investments. Once you have, even if you're approved for Stride, you still have to go back and be approved under a base rate proceeding. And the base rate proceeding requires you to consider certain things that you don't have to require in Stride.
So there's no concern from the committee that this may slow down and or change the economics behind doing replacement projects?
I guess I don't understand, how do you worry, how do you feel would slow it down? Because.
Well, okay, understanding that this is either a walkthrough of a bill, which a walkthrough doesn't normally involve, like me.
No, amendment, no, we're here for questions, just not amendment. We're not going to discuss other amendments. So we're here to discuss this. I'm trying to understand what your question is.
So when we have Stride, and that is right, that's accelerating replacement of projects. The bill questioned that policy, at least in a couple of instances, but in the one that I remember were examples of like Baltimore City where there were pipelines on a map, and the question would be, well, what could you do alternatively to putting in new pipelines? And so that's what this language did. It said, okay, there may be other options other than replacing the pipeline. It could be electrification. And so my purpose of asking the question is not to get into the policy, it's to ask, did we incorporate any, and when I say industry, I'm thinking gas companies' input as to whether or not this language actually helps, they may not agree with it, but at least helps them get to a place where they can find it workable. Because who they're having to prove this to, I assume, is the PSC. That's what this is. So you don't want the PSC, in my opinion, I mean, this is Chris talking, I mean, you don't want PSC to always say no to a gas line replacement. Right? I think there has to be at least some deference to, we prefer to do that until there's a viable way to do electrification. So either this language makes it exceedingly hard to get through the PSC to do a gas line replacement, or it doesn't. And that's basically my question. And we can come back and get an answer later, but that's the purpose of the question.
No, so, and just for clarity, for Stride purposes, their issues were addressed. So it doesn't have to consider electrification for purposes of Stride.
Right.
Which is safety investments and replacements.
Well, that's why, then you've answered my question, and we can proceed.
Okay.
Okay. Yep.
Just on that, what we're talking about, one of the concerns we had was, remember, I think, is this the Pippi amendments you were talking about, trying to keep the legalese out of there, that we're not going to do something that's going to tell a gas company that they're shortchanged on this? We've decided to go another route after their investment. That was one of our questions back then.
So I don't want to like mislead anybody here, right? It's like Pippi had amendments specifically around electrification language. And I'm trying to think of the one other topic. It did have to do with non-pipeline alternatives, but I'm grasping at what he wanted to change. We made those changes in the stride provision of the bill. Additionally, the utilities came in and they had a concern around a 2-year notification. We dropped that to 6 months, which, Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, that is in line with what how long they have to notify customers today, correct? For stride, yeah. For stride, correct, right? But I don't want to misrepresent the gas company's position. I still think that they probably would oppose the bill overall, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, but I think our concern was that we're not going to draw these people in to do stuff. We're not going to get gas if we're going to tell them that there's a real good chance you have 6 months and you'll be out of here. And I think that was the concern when we were coming up on this, to replace them. If a gas line's looking to somebody from the PSC might say, it looks tough to do this, maybe we should hurry up and put something else in, or solar, or whatever you want to put in there. That was part of the question, I believe. Am I making?
So I would kind of go ahead, Ben, you want to take a crack at this? Because I would bifurcate that out, but go ahead.
Yeah, so on this amendment that we're talking about here on page 19 to 20, this is all about distribution investment, not the investment for, let's say, a gas generation plant. Now, a gas generation plant will need pipelines to them, but part of that would be that that's a new build and they need, or maybe they're using the existing system to bring them gas. And so this, what I view is happening here in this amendment is telling us, we sort of did something that's in order already, so that's where this was kind of based off of. Is saying when you show up to move your capital investments into base rates, we want to make sure you're doing a demonstration of cost effectiveness of those choices. And was there an opportunity? Would it have made sense to defer? Let's have that discussion inside the base rate case, and we're going to look at your management pejorative and everything and what you did there, and then decide was it prudent or not. So that's the discussion that's happening, I would say, here on this. But if a new gas plant wanted to come to the state and they said, I need a gas line to hook up and I'm willing to pay for it, I don't view this as stopping that. We might have a discussion about why did you install it? Oh, the gas plant showed up and said they need the infrastructure. Okay, well, that's part of the overall discussion inside the case.
Okay. I'm sure they'll come talk to us.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Too, like, we're talking financing mechanism too, right? Stride is kind of upfront on the ratepayers versus this is on the back end asking, them after the fact.
Right, so Stride is all about being able to get the $2 surcharge before we talk about this moving into base rates. This is about moving investment into base rates. Yeah.
On page 20, section 4-504, this is a prohibition for an investor-owned electric company, gas company, or combination gas and electric company. Public service company may not recover through rates any costs associated with membership, dues, sponsorships, or contributions to an industry trade association, group, or related entity exempt from taxation under section 501 of the Internal Revenue Code, or the acquisition, use, or allocation of costs associated with a private plane that is owned or leased by the public service company or its holding company.
That has been looming on everyone's calendar for months.
The border.
Are there any questions on that? Okay.
Lobbying, yes. We're out. Lobbying's out.
Yeah.
Well, no. Trade association. What do you care about?
Don't look at me.
So any dues to any trade association.
So I think Ben could answer that question because I think as drafted, he doesn't think that it would eliminate those types of trade associations.
I think, so EEI, the trade association due to them is probably out in this because they are a trade group. The one that I think is a little up in the air would be somebody like an EPRI, who they are doing, their fundamental reason for existence is research. So AGA, Edison Electric Institute, those are trade groups.
So they would be out 100%.
Right, I would view those as likely out. Somebody could debate that with us, but they're pretty, in my mind, pretty clearly a trade association. Somebody like an EPRI, which is the utilities premier research institute, they do good work. They are a 501, so that is a little risk there, but they're not, I would especially think, as a trade association group and something that we would debate inside the case.
We're not trying to wrap something up in here that doesn't belong. So if you have like a specific example and want to get with me or Ben, we're happy to take research out, so long as all of a sudden lobbying isn't research. I think we'll happily accommodate Potomac Edison.
We're moving on to the next amendment, HB 1035-563-326. There is a reprint with this amendment. This amendment is dealing with the solicitations, procurements, and co-location.
Page 2 of what's laying it out, but it's 563-326, number 1.
Lose much be the rating of the amendment. Read the amendment. So ordered.
No.
No,
No.
1037 is something different.
Still 1035.
We're still at 1035.
So
Second amendment.
1030,
1035/563326/1. So it's the Second Amendment on 1035.
so on page 4,
And this is a reprint, by the way.
yeah, there's, do you want me to work off the reprint?
You
or-
can, wait, is there an amendment? Oh,
There's an amendment. I'm talking about on the
on the
amendment,
amendment.
but you can follow on the
big-
reprint. if you
Yeah, they have the amendments, if you just want to follow along. Let's go with it, go with the amendments.
Okay. Page 4 of the amendment includes in the definition for electric company, a person who provides electricity to a large load customer in accordance with section 7-506.1 of this article. That is the section dealing with co-location. So it clarifies that if you provide electricity in a behind-the-meter arrangement, you are still an electric company for purposes of this article. It does the same change for electricity supplier. On page 5, it includes in the definition for retail electric customer, a large load customer that purchases electricity in a behind-the-meter arrangement. Are there any questions about the definitional changes?
Being the person who sells electricity, does this in any way collide with Drive from last year or VPPs in any way?
No.
Because of the scale, right?
So the large load customer.
Definition is 100 megawatts, so yeah, they should be out.
Thank you.
Well, from this issue, I don't know. Yeah.
Got it. That's what I, just confirming. Appreciate it.
On page 7 of the amendments, 7-216.2, this is a section that was taken from Delegate Charkoudian's ACE bill. This is for distribution storage, a requirement of 150 megawatts of distribution connected front-of-the-meter energy storage devices.
What bill? ACE bill?
ACE,
She's gotta have that
HB
name.
398.
It's her big bill. Well,
One.
of her big bills. But it's the one that they'll,
There's 17 of them.
It's her priority, one of her 17 priorities.
What was the bill number?
398.
And that is pages 7 through 12 of the amendment. So on page 12 of the amendment, these are the amendments that were requested by the Public Service Commission. It makes certain changes to the co-location requirement to make clear that a large load customer in any generating station supplying electricity to the large load customer in accordance with this section, they are still subject to any direct or indirect costs and fees that are normally applied to the retail electric customers in the service territory in which the large load customer or generating station is located. And it makes an exception for microgrids if someone wanted to. 12 and 13, I apologize.
Makes exception for microgrids.
Yes. So if you wanted to build if you were a data center, for example, and you wanted to bring your own generation and you didn't want to connect it to PJM's grid, that would be considered a microgrid, where you're in a self-contained grid. And so you would not be subject to the requirements of this section if you were having a microgrid, for example. Yeah.
Basically.
So there are some current examples of microgrids like Easton.
There are. Yeah, but this would be an example of like Amazon wants to put up a massive data center and they want to co-locate. We don't have a problem with that as long as they're bringing one in.
Sorry, my bad. So Amazon wants to, and I shouldn't really use the company, but they want to build a massive data center, and it's going to take 1,000 megawatts. What we're saying is bring in 1,500 megawatts. You can plug in and do your thing, and now you're your own little hub. Yep.
Well, why'd you use 1,000 and 1,500? Is that, you meant 1,000, I'm sorry.
So are we saying? But still in that situation, they have to pay the non-bypassable surcharges, right? Like offshore wind or?
I think on that one, we would have to probably, so E is capturing, so let me maybe help back this up a little. So the proposed legislation before this is all about situations where the generator, new or existing, is interconnected to the grid and somebody is co-locating behind the meter with them, and the allowance for that arrangement to exist. And our amendment is in E is clarifying I can allocate them all the cost and direct state stuff as appropriate. I would say for the microgrid, I don't want to say here today that got caught up in that. So if that is important to the committee, then I think we would need to look at a fix there if you think that's a miss.
Yeah, because I think we'd basically be saying that they don't have to be part of the RPS. So you'd have 1,000 megawatts of load that would be voluntarily choosing what their energy mix is. And we're letting them out of the RPS, we're letting them out of Empower, we're letting them out of everything else that energy use in the state contributing towards greenhouse gas emissions and pollution in the state has to pay towards.
I think our thought process there was if they're bringing their own power.
We would be okay with that. They're bringing everything else with them.
But what that means is that, like, we have an RPS of 50%. Their generation is going to count against us, and then the rest of the state is going to have to pay more, right? So like to get to 50%, if they're bringing, if we're, let's say we have 1,000 megawatts of load in the state, which we don't, and they bring another 200, we've now gone, to meet our RPS, we've gone from 500 to 600 to meet the RPS. If they're not responsible for any of that, then that additional 100 has to be paid for by residential ratepayers. It's another way that sort of load gets passed on, because everyone else, whether we bring our load or not, has to pay into the various things that we've determined are important and paid for on rates.
Ben, do you think that they would count against that total number in that scenario? Like, would it bring it, do you know what I'm saying?
I would need to check the statute for how we come up with the RPS requirement to say if that load would count, because it's not, because the whole point of this microgrid is you are not plugged into the
I don't
grid.
think it would count
So,
to the denominator.
I want to check that, but if there are
It would
other-
count, sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry, but
It
if,
would count towards our greenhouse gas emissions.
yeah, I don't think that, yeah, I would agree with that. So if
Okay.
there's certain things that we want to pull in here, or you want us to make an examination using certain policy guidance, like whether you should be playing in this sphere or not, we could look at that.
Push back on this,
So just to be clear,
fighting us.
the greenhouse gas emissions and the RPS are two different situations. So for RPS situations, a microgrid wouldn't affect the rest of the state.
Well, we don't know. He's going to check, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, we can-
all right, it's fine.
Yeah, we'll follow.
Keep going.
Continuing on page 13, there's a definitional change to effective nameplate capacity. It changes it to mean the amount of energy an energy storage device can deliver continuously to the electric system over a period of at least 4 hours, sorry. Would love a battery for 4 years. There's a definition of large capacity energy resource that was added. And this means that on or before January 1st, 2025, it was a generating station that has applied to PJM for interconnection approval or has been approved by PJM for interconnection approval and has a capacity rating equal to or greater than 20 megawatts after accounting for the effective load carrying capability. There was some rearranging of the subtitle because as introduced, the bill had solicitations for the expedited CPCN and it had the nuclear procurement. But since we were bringing in the transmission energy storage device procurement from Delegate Charkoudian's bill, the subtitle had to be rearranged, so certain things were moved. That's for the next few pages. On page 17,
Go ahead.
That's the PLAs. It's like 4 or 5 pages of project labor agreement language. Was that, so that wasn't part of the original bill, or has it been drafted in a different way? What's the,
It was part of the original ACE bill, correct? Delegate Turner?
Wait,
It was part of her bill was amended into this. It was part of the original bill, Charkoudian's original ACE bill. It was not part of 1035, but obviously, there's been multiple amendments at this point.
for clarification, it was in 1035 for the nuclear procurement.
Oh, okay, sorry. I meant for this provision. Like, this whole bill just is now plopped in here. It was in that bill originally.
so does it apply just to her section of the bill, the ACE bill, or is this?
I think it'll come up again later.
but this part applies only to the ACE part.
Correct. It
I
only
guess the
applies to
question
this.
is, where are their project labor agreements versus prevailing wage?
So let me just be fair. They call them community benefit agreements. They don't call them project labor agreements, and there's
Pull that up. Let's get
They.
that up, right?
we.
Yeah, there is a difference, but.
Well, if the only way it would be a difference that would matter to me is if it allows merit contractors to do work.
It's going to. It's going to. No, you don't. This is going to come out.
signature with a union, and a community benefit agreement has a lot of the same features, but doesn't require that.
And I will say that the community benefit agreement is still a challenge, so obviously working with the Senate, that may not survive. So just to be aware for everybody listening, that's something that's been, by all intents and purposes, hanging on by a thread.
Yep.
So it may very well not be in the final, yeah, that's one of the 3 things that is definitely, may come out of the bill.
Okay. Question answered.
Page 17. So starting on page 17, these are the changes that were made to the solicitation under 1035. So originally, the solicitation was just for dispatchable energy generation. It now includes large capacity energy resources. On page 18, it means anything that was in the PJM as of January 1, 25, or approved out of the queue as of January 1, 25.
Yeah.
So page 18 clarifies the requirements for a proposal under the solicitation. It sets the process by which PSC and the PPRP will approve certain things. Page 19 are requirements for application requirements, what needs to be in the application. Page 27-1208 requires that within 45 days of the closing date for the solicitation period, PPRP shall recommend to the commission certain proposals, and then within 15 days after that, the commission shall let proposals know what has been approved or not. On page 21, there's a requirement that every 5 years after the date that natural gas dispatchable energy generation project or large capacity energy resource project becomes operational, that they submit to the commission a report regarding the feasibility of converting the natural gas dispatchable energy generation or large capacity energy resource to the use of only hydrogen or zero emission biofuel. On the bottom of page 21, it establishes a staggered process for expediting CPCNs.
35. No.
Just keep going.
Just keep going.
Just keep going.
So initially with the solicitation, PSC will approve up to 10 proposals. If PSC determines that they have the ability to approve more, they will. Proposals will be approved on a 4-to-1 ratio for non-emissions emitting projects to every one emissions emitting project. I believe that there needs to be some clarifying language included regarding what happens if less than 10 projects are approved, or if, for instance, no non-emissions projects are approved or no emissions emitting projects are approved. Is that correct, Ben?
A technical amendment to make sure that if the ratio, if we have enough projects to under 10, the ratio doesn't mess up our ability to bring people in, basically. So, but if you have, basically, if there's enough projects to serve that ratio, that's the order we take them in.
The expedited CPCN process, does that only apply to nuclear and natural gas generation, or are we broadening that for the entirety of any CPCN proceeding?
The expedited CPCN will apply to anything approved under the solicitation, so that it can include natural gas, nuclear, battery storage, solar, anything.
I'm just going to make a statement. I don't want to get into a debate. I don't think you guys want to get into a debate. But like, I live on the Eastern Shore. At some point in my lifetime, we will probably have a small modular reactor. That would be my prediction, maybe in the next 10 years. If it's located within 5 or 10 miles of my house, I am not going to be comfortable voting for a bill that expedites a CPCN process. So I'm only flagging this only through the lens of not being an obstructionist on solar, but rather understanding the original generation as to why a CPCN process exists. And it was primarily because at some point somebody was going to put a big nuclear plant somewhere, and this was the procedure to.
Dave, could you explain expedite CPCN process?
Yes, so if we select, whatever projects do get selected to go through this, effectively, we would run the process within, once they, the process from pre-application to approval would be 385 days, which is about it's probably about a 3-ish month acceleration of the overall process. Mm-hmm. And so, anyways, when we were working with the sponsors for amendments, we were looking for the ability to manage the process, but also preserve the CPCN review process, but maybe do it a little bit quicker. And so we go ahead.
Any community impact or community weigh-ins that are going to be excluded under this?
No, because my understanding is those have all been struck at this point.
you
It's
go.
just been done faster.
Right.
Same thing, it's just an accelerated.
There you go. Just for for Chris, all that to say, it's just prioritizing. It's not, you're not missing on any steps of the normal CPCN
It
process.
just makes it go faster.
So I don't have my bill file, but in PSC's testimony, there was a narrative that talked about the CPCN process as being, dynamic isn't the right word, but it can be heavy subject matter. It's where
Yes.
conflict occurs, and there's a good nature to having conflict as opposed to bypassing it. And so you don't think as PSC that expediting it gets rid of the rigor, that's my word, you might have a different way to go about it, but of what that process looks like?
I don't think it's really the rigor, but I do think that it's still, like, the contention will still be there. I think it is fair to say it'll be maybe happening at a quicker pace than maybe some others would be appreciate. I think we were trying to meet the policy of can we bring on some other, can we bring on this generation on a quicker clip? But we, in our testimony is to that, to your point, we wanted to make sure everyone's aware this is not a panacea in terms of once the generator shows up and says they want to build somewhere. So, yes, I think we will still be rigorous, but yes, I think it's fair to say there will probably be some frustration with a slightly faster process.
So are you saying nothing changes except you're going to speed it up? Is that pretty much what you just said? Yeah.
Right, that's the intent.
We're basically telling them, instead of this thing taking a year, you're now gonna you're gonna put it at the front of the queue, and it's gonna take 6 months, but you're still doing everything.
Sorry.
You just have to go faster. That's all.
Chris?
Thank you for letting me answer it. Yep, you've answered it.
Thank you. Next page, please.
The next few pages make conforming changes, just changing, so like page 24 is just conforming changes. On page 25, this is dealing with the nuclear procurement. There was an issue with the language as introduced, potentially violating Talon v. Hughes. So there was a change to the procurement method. Instead, the bill would be creating a zero emission credit. It will be similar to the New York's model, but catered to new nuclear generation instead of existing nuclear generation like the New York model. So it established regulations regarding the zero emission credit, allows for PSC to establish a formula to change the long-term pricing schedule every 2 years based on certain market factors, requires the commission to establish an escrow account, and requires electric companies to purchase these zero emission credits based on their electricity sales data. Are there any questions on that?
So we have a colleague who's always talking about that nuclear should be in. Does this satisfy that issue? No, yes, no? Okay.
The intent is there to, yes, open this up for nuclear development, nuclear construction. However, I can't can't guess about satisfying that colleague, but to address some of his concerns, yes, it does.
But it acknowledges.
It acknowledges and addresses and opens that up, so yes,
He's never satisfied.
exactly.
Okay.
Purchasing credits, can you, is that going to rate, does that affect rates, obviously?
So Ben can speak to it.
Yes, we'll have a transfer of money from ratepayers to these facilities for this, yes.
For nuclear.
It'll be, I don't wanna say exactly like.
Nope, don't say that. Don't say it.
No,
Don't even say it.
I won't say it.
Go ahead.
Nope.
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 I dare.
Plead the fifth.
But, so it'll be, yeah.
Does that affect any of the rate I'm sorry, does that affect any of the rate conversations we had in the last amendment? Remember how it was talking about?
You talk about the ratepayer protections. So the ratepayer protections are through rate-making cases at the PSC. That's utility side. So the costs from this wouldn't affect those, but this will affect distribution rates overall, if that makes sense.
Well, now that we're on the rate thing, is this bill overall, is it rate negative or rate positive?
Once we've identified a project and that there will be something that affects the rate payer. This is again, much like I guess the thing we did when we had other initiatives that we felt we need to invest in. Obviously, there's going to be has to be some fiscal guarantee for whoever's constructing that nuclear facility.
Yeah.
And so it will obviously affect the rates.
I guess my point is, keep in mind, everybody's concerned about their rates, and that's why
Yes.
we're coming up with legislation that I want to be able to sit back and say, this is going to help you, or this is going to hurt you.
And remember, we're concerned not only about the rates, but also about our making sure that we're creating energy in Maryland. So that's the problem. It's like, how do you create energy in Maryland?
For free.
Right. Who comes in and just gives up all their own money on a hope that it's going to work? So that's the challenge.
Generation reliability.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Clarify, so this is any new generation, nuclear generation, is that right, from here on out, or is it apply to current generation at Calvert Cliffs, for example?
As drafted, it applies only to new generation, but there can be clarifying language to ensure that if an existing company builds new generation, that they don't get a ZEC for existing generation, if that's your concern.
Right, so, so Calvert Cliffs is potentially going to do some upgrades, and they'll be able to produce more based on their upgrades. So that potentially, the more, right, the delta of the additional amount they're able to produce with those upgrades that could be funded by this would count, but that wouldn't make everything they're producing eligible. Is that correct? And then if they did a third reactor, or if an SMR comes in 27 years, all of those would be eligible for.
Correct.
That's the intent, yes.
Okay, got it, thank you.
Beginning on page 27 is the transmission energy storage devices. This was taken from Delegate Charkoudian's bill. It requires the commission to solicit for up to 1.6 gigawatts of battery storage. And to clarify, a battery storage project approved under this part would be eligible for an expedited CPCN if it was selected in the solicitation under Part 2. This is page 27 through 36. This is the requirements around transmission energy storage device procurement. There was already a requirement in law that the Public Service Commission procure up to 3.1 gigawatts of transmission energy storage devices. Is that correct, Ben?
It doesn't say, but in law, we don't procure.
3,000 megawatts of energy storage devices. We've gone through a whole rulemaking to establish various processes to start those types of incentives or procurement programs for that. So I view this as adding as another tranche under that.
So beginning pages 36 through 39, these are changes made to the state finance and procurement article to allow for an expedited procurement for the purposes of ensuring that generation can be built as fast as possible. These were technical changes requested by the Public Service Commission.
Ben, do you want to walk through that? Because I know there's going to be quite.
Yeah, no, so.
Basically, anytime we need to run a procurement that it either exceeds $50,000 or $100,000, basically we have to go through a much larger process to get a hold of those individuals, those consultants. That's usually a 6 to 9 month process instead of maybe a couple months. We've run into a number of times where that has impacted our ability to meet the deadline set by you in statute. So what we're trying to do here is say only in those specific instances where you're telling us to get something done on time, that we have more flexibility to get those consultants on board, and it covers us and a couple other agencies, OPC, the Maryland Energy Administration, Department of Environment, and Department of Natural Resources, so PPRP, Power Plant Research Program.
The clarifying language seems to be talking about climate change, environmental, energy, and greenhouse gas emission related issues.
Which are usually the legislation you all ask us to usually look into on a specific time frame. I think we were trying to capture.
So you're saying current situation is we have a series of laws and policies that causes you to slow down to evaluate, and you're saying under this amendment, it's allowing you to do things in an expedited fashion?
It's allowing us to get the consultants quicker to do
Hire
your study.
consultants to make it so you can do the work faster.
Right, to do the work on the timeframes that you're asking us to meet.
Beginning page 39 through 41, so page 41, this is making changes to the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. It is creating an allowable use for grants to electric companies to be refunded or credited to each residential distribution customer based on the customer's consumption of electricity. It will require that any refunding or crediting of amounts to residential distribution customers be identified on the customer's bill as a line item identified as a legislative energy hardship credit. It specifies that electric company awarded a grant under this may not retain any of the grant funds to cover overhead expenses and shall provide all of the grant funds to residential distribution customers, and states that the process shall be overseen by the Public Service Commission. Are there any questions on that?
Alternate compliance payments get applied to people in hardship.
So it wouldn't be specific to people in hardship. It would be all residential customers in the state. The state can authorize grants of that ACP money directly back to them.
So it doesn't go through the utility, it goes directly to the.
Well, it'll be a pass-through through the utility.
The utility's gonna refund it $8 to $10 a bill, depending on where you live.
Roughly, give or take. But the utility is going to administer it back to the customer. So you will see I'll make it up, $6, $10, $12 line on your bill that will read legislative hardship credit.
I ran out of pages. I only have 38.
You can stay with me.
You must have got the green version of the bill. We're trying to save paper. Here, Steve, here, I'll give you mine. I don't want it anyway.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you're good.
Hey, well, I need mine.
So essentially, it's basically like a rebate to the customers.
Yeah.
Correct.
Oh, this is going to everybody.
Correct. Everybody's getting it.
So you get one and
There you
you get
go.
one.
You
and
beat me.
like that.
You guys are good for that.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Sorry.
On page 42, there's changes to the tax general article to make clear that anyone receiving the legislative energy hardship credit would not have to be taxed on that credit. Page 43 makes changes to the expedited CPCN, making clear that the commission may prioritize the expedited CPCN over normal CPCN proceedings, and that the commission may extend the time for review of normal CPCNs if they are prioritizing the review of an expedited CPCN. Page 44 clarifies the timeline for the expedited CPCN. For instance, under subsection E, it reduces from 90 to 45 days the pre-application process. It specifies when the PPRP has to make certain determinations. It gives the commission permission to delay processing of applications if they receive more than 5 applications in a certain amount of time. And it makes other conforming changes. And it's struck originally in the bill as drafted, it exempted certain projects from certain pre-authorization requirements if it was at an existing location where there was interconnection. That was struck and replaced with an expedited timeline for those projects. Are there any questions on that? As drafted, if you were to build at Brandon Shores when they closed down, under the bill, you wouldn't have to go through any environmental review. It would just be a presumption by the commission that that project could be at that location. Instead of that explicit presumption, it just accelerates the timeline of review. On page 47, uncodified language, this is an explicit grant for fiscal 26 from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund to residential ratepayers, requiring that there's a distribution twice during the fiscal year, once during a peak summer month and once during a peak winter month. It requires that the distribution be done in accordance with the requirements under the CEF fund. Are there any questions on that? To the third amendment, that's HB 1035 743426. This amendment is the Tier 1 waste to energy bill. It's removing waste and refuse from an eligible inclusion in the renewable energy portfolio standard.
This was that very.
No. 1035? No. It's going to go into 1035, correct? Yes, it's an amendment into 1035. It's Delegate Stewart's and the Senate President's bill. It is going in.
Yep.
Are there any questions on that?
Did you say so?
All right, going to the next amendment, the final amendment for 1035, 523424.
Oh, another one.
Go ahead.
This amendment makes certain changes to certain energy assistance programs. On page 2 of 5 of the amendment, this is dealing with the Department of Housing and Community Development. This is related to Empower. This allows them to use more funding sources so that the funds that are coming from the state are reduced. According to the fiscal note, DLS projects that with this amendment, ratepayer costs will be reduced significantly for the Empower Fund. And then on page 5, it's a requirement that the Department of Human Services report to the General Assembly any necessary legislative or regulatory changes necessary to implement the recommendations of OPEGA to combine all energy assistance programs in the state into one program. Are there any questions on those amendments? All right, we'll be moving on to HB 1036.
Page 17 of the original bill, question, there was a, it said that ratepayers would be held harmless for any cost overruns. Is that still in?
Page 17 of the original bill?
Yeah.
Sorry, give me 1 second.
So,
Oh, the requirement that for the solicitation that no ratepayer money is used?
no, it says ratepayers in the state shall be held harmless for any cost overruns, assuming anyone would build
Oh,
operation under that.
yes. This is a part of the long-term pricing schedule for if, basically saying that the state will honor their contractual commitments, but they aren't responsible for anything that happens outside of that.
All right, and then the one gentleman who said if we wanted to be successful with gas in the state, we'd have to suspend the RGGI requirements. Is any of these amendments do that?
The RGGI program has not been touched.
Okay.
The first amendment for HB 1036 is 483529.
Yep, 1036.
I have it.
I only have 1035.
Oh, you need to.
1 second. Is it true? Okay.
Does anyone have a 1036 print? Yes. Yeah. A reprint, at least even the reprint? Oh, yeah.
What's that right there?
1036 and 1036 amendments. No, you have them.
Here it is, they left it on the floor.
You put it on the floor.
You put them on the floor. We have it.
The amendments in the bill. That's fine.
Got it. Anybody else?
Yeah, please. Thanks, Jordan.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Page 1 of the amendment creates 2 new definitions, one for a priority preservation area and one for a project area. Also, it changes the megawatts from 2 to 1 megawatts for solar energy generating systems that this section applies to. That's on page 2, it includes aggregate net metering as one of the types of solar energy generating stations that this section applies to. Also on page 2, it clarifies that for a construction of a solar energy generation plant under this section, they have to have a CPCN or an alternate approval under 7-207.1, or for generating stations under 2 megawatts, the local jurisdiction verifies that the proposed construction meets all of the site requirements under subsection F of this section. At the bottom of page 2, it also clarifies that when a person submits an application or a site approval plan, they shall include with that application written documentation or other evidence showing that the proposed construction meets the requirements of subsections F and G of this section. On page 3, it specifies that if a solar energy generating station is built in a underserved community, that they must have 2 community hearings, of which 1 will be virtual, and outlines the notification requirements associated with those community meetings. Page 4 through 7 almost are changes to the setback and barrier requirements that a solar energy generating station must meet under this section in order to be verified that they meet the standard siting requirements. Some of the requirements are that there's only use of black or green vinyl wire mesh, that fencing is not less than 50 feet away from the edge of any public right-of-way. It makes clear that this does not include interconnection with the electric system. It specifies mitigation requirements, it specifies vegetation requirements,
That's fine.
and the like.
Yep. Go ahead.
On page 7, it specifies that a local jurisdiction shall hold, it specifies that a solar energy generating station must give a local jurisdiction a landscaping bond and specifies the requirements of the local jurisdiction in relation to the landscaping bond, holding it for up to 5 years. On page 8, these are more siting requirements. Page 9. Page 9 clarifies that if a solar energy generating station provides evidence of an agreement with the county, that they shall be presumed to have met the requirements of this section. So if a solar energy generating station goes to a county for lesser requirements, they shall be presumed to met the requirements of this section. Also on page 5, it increases the decommissioning bond from 100% to 125%.
Page 9.
Sorry, page 9, I apologize. At the bottom of page 9, these are specific exemptions to the prohibition on zoning bans. So paragraph 3 for solar energy generating stations over 5 megawatts. As of January 1, 2025, they may not be built in a tier 1 or tier 2 mapped locally designated growth area, a medium density residential area, or a high density residential area, or a mixed use area. And then under paragraph 4, solar energy generations once more than 5% of the total acreage of a priority preservation area has been used, no longer prohibits a local jurisdiction from zoning them out. A local jurisdiction would still be able to allow for more being built past that 5%, but they would no longer be prohibited from banning it. So ag preserve.
So we're going to put this on preserve ag.
So there's,
Just only 5% of it.
This is what Vico Farm, this is what they want.
so to better clarify, 5% of the ag preserve land has to be allowed to build solar on. After that 5% is up to the county what they want to do.
What does the be located in the project area within the prairie preservation area means? Does that mean that the county says, here's the 5% you can use?
No, I think the county's designating, here's your ag preserve.
And then within that, it's like, okay, I'll make them, math easy, 100 acres. Then within that, you can apply for the 5 acres to which the solar goes on.
So you're asking if the county identifies where the solar goes?
I'm trying to figure out what number 2 means.
So the project area is, a solar energy generating station is supposed to be built on a certain amount of land. The project area is meant to include, maybe they're not parking the materials and the rest of that stuff on that specific land, but it's meant to encompass those materials as well until the solar energy generating station is built.
Sorry, is project area defined somewhere?
Yes.
Maybe I missed.
On the first page.
An area within which construction materials. So, yeah, so I'm just not clear on who's defining that. Does the county, who sets that? The solar company says, this is my project area?
I believe so, but if you want more clarity on that, it's just meant to make clear that if they're putting their construction materials in this one area, that's included within that 5% until they clean that up and move that out.
So the county, the way I view is the county will identify 5% of ag that they allow, or where, as the projects come through us. So I don't believe the way I understand is I don't believe that they're going to like first come, first serve on the ag land. I think the counties will have some input on what ag land can be used for solar.
Okay, I think that's my question and potentially challenging, because if you have an ag reserve or whatever it is, and this farmer over here says, I want to use my farm for solar, but the county says this is the area you can use for solar.
No. This is something I am not happy with at all. This is taking away a farmer's rights to me. But again, this is what both the right side and MACO have been fighting for. So, and this is a MOCO thing. Honestly, this is your county. So, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it is.
And can I just say one more thing?
You can.
For the record? I
Please.
think you know this, Mr. Chair, but I just think, like, that also potentially increases there's the farmer's rights piece, there's also the cost piece, because there's places where interconnecting into the grid is less costly, and if you pick these random farms over here that aren't good interconnection points, then it's a huge additional cost to.
I was good until your county stood up against me. I was able to hold most people off. I can't do that in the left. I can hold off the right, and I can't hold off the right and the left. In this kind I was sandwiched, so I agree. But that's where we are.
Okay, thank you.
% or more if the county approves. What's or more? How much? They could take our land and preservation, which taxpayer funded to buy that land. County.
The local county
can take.
They want all their ag preservation. The same people that designated it
Can
then say, yes, you can put solar on it.
Okay.
So I don't see that happening.
Every county's different.
Well, I would believe,
I don't see that happening.
are you going to, 5%, is that going to be in every county? They will do it or they can do it?
They have to at least do 5% of their ag land. You can't zone it completely out because it's all ag land.
Okay. The fear is that some counties will have to do a lot of it and other counties won't.
But it's only 5%, so how's that work?
Well, 5% is still 5%. I understand your point, but,
Yeah. The states have to do more.
but every county's, okay.
The state says you can do up to, and then the rest is up to
Yeah,
you.
the county chooses to do more, they can. I don't see that happening, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Question, currently if land's in ag preservation, you can't put solar on it, right?
Well, that's not what this is.
No, you're thinking of
This is, yeah, it's not an easement, this is.
You're thinking, yeah.
You're not talking about lands under easement.
It's our way of saying prime ag.
They still can't put solar on it.
No, if there's you're talking about MAPLF easement, no, you can't build solar on those easements.
But you can on ag preservation.
That's their way of saying prime ag. That's the, yeah.
So you're just talking about land that's zoned agriculture?
Yeah, no, it's not zoned, it's ag preserved, not zoned, let's be clear, not zoned agriculture, it has to be preserved.
So how is it preserved if you don't have an easement on it?
It's designated as, they have 98,000 acres of MOCO, that's not all an easement. It's considered, it's zoned or designated ag land.
It's 2-518 of the agricultural article where they describe that.
He knew it by heart.
No, I saw it on your amendment.
We did it 50 years ago.
Can I ask just one question? Is the 5% prospective or is that backward?
Backward,
Backwards, total.
so you can't change.
So in other words, if the county's already laid some percentage of solar in some of these areas,
They're good,
it qualifies toward 5%.
of course.
Yes. What we're saying though is you can't turn around and say this was one day commercial and then
Ag preserved.
all of a sudden it's ag preserve.
No,
'cause you didn't
that's
want
also
solar.
prospective.
That's also prospective, correct. Does that make sense?
So that's the 10-year comprehensive plan. You're saying you can't turn around and change your comp plan to.
So there's a drop dead date as of January 1, 2025. So it freezes whatever your zoning was at that date and then bases off that date.
What's the purpose of comprehensive plans for counties?
It's not, because the comprehensive plan for that 10 years is right there.
So there's no more. Mako's good with this?
Yes, they're the ones asked for this.
Okay, well, I'll talk to Mako.
Okay.
Because it sounds like to me for addressing Mako, at least conceptually, we would be talking about our counties, right?
Yeah.
All right.
I don't know, but I think that.
Last page.
On page 11 of the amendments, it makes changes to the energy storage siting portion of the bill, these are amendments that PSC requested, is meant to conform with the process that PSC was already establishing in relation to energy storage devices.
All right. Next, please.
I have a question on page 9 where we're talking about the bond. Is that the bond that they will put up in case there's a decommission of the solar? So they have to put up 125?
Yes.
Let's say they have to put up 125%.
Yes, that was, I believe, at PSC's request.
Yep.
Thank you.
You know, it's bad if they started vacuuming while you're still.
Right. So keep asking questions.
Moving on to the next amendment, HB 1036-783-921. These are changes to the Community Solar Auto Enrollment Program. On page 1, it clarifies that a local government acting as a subscriber organization is included under this section. Also on page 1, it includes auto enrollment subscribers in subsection M, requiring that they get a guaranteed benefit on their bill so that they are not paying more than 90% of the bill credit issued on the bill. On page 2, it changes the parameters of the program to make it so that the commission is adopting regulations to establish and maintain the auto enrollment projects, will require a local government to go to the commission for approval of their auto enrollment project. On page 3, it increases from 51% to 60% the amount of low and moderate income subscribers that must be under the program. And it clarifies that they must be prioritized first before subscribers that aren't LMI can be enrolled. Also on page 3, it requires a local government to comply with the request for a subscriber or potential subscriber to decline or opt out within 30 days after receiving the request. On page 4, it states how local governments may access electric company data in order to find automatic enrollment customers, and requires the local government to pay the costs incurred by an electric company for doing those things. And then page 5 is just changes to the report that was required under the bill. Are there any questions about the automatic enrollment portions?
That information?
So because they're going to prioritize low and moderate income,
Oh, so for the calculation to 60?
yeah, they need to be able to find them so that they can enroll them.
Okay.
But PSC will be setting the parameters of that program and the protections for that.
Oh, I like that.
And then the last amendment on HB 1036 is 743-327. It's a new amendment. Yeah, one page, finally. So in the bill as introduced, it was requiring the Commission and the Maryland Energy Administration to come up with technical safety standards for rooftop solar. The Commission and the Maryland Energy Administration is struck and replaced with the Maryland Department of Labor. And instead of technical safety standards, it requires the Department of Labor to come up with a special solar contractor's license. Are there any questions on that?
It's not a fee, it's a tariff.
Okay.
All right. Where's the last one?
The final bill is HB 1037.
This train wreck.
bill due now?
Yeah, it's on the. At the back.
Oh, okay.
Just go through the amendment, you can throw the actual bill out.
HB 1037, as introduced, was creating an integrated resource planning office. The amendment makes wholesale changes to the bill. It changes the office to the Strategic Energy Planning Office. It makes changes to the office to ensure it's sufficiently independent and free from political interference. It requires the office to develop a comprehensive wholesale energy market and bulk power system risk report. It requires the office to make forecasts on 20-year projections, assessing wholesale energy market financial resource adequacy and reliability risks associated with serving the state's long-term energy needs. It sets guides for how the scenarios and forecasts should be completed and what should be considered when completing them. It requires the office to conduct a stakeholder process in developing inputs for the forecasts. It requires a report by the office every 3 years. And it requires the commission to conduct a public proceeding to assess the results and recommendations of the report submitted by the office.
Great job, Brian. Any questions on that, guys? So what we're going to be doing on Friday is dealing with other amendments. No, Brian did a great job. And so we're going to be doing this on Friday. So if you have any amendments, then make sure that you please get them to us. Thank you guys very much. Have a good night. See you guys in the morning. Good job, everyone.
Yeah.